Welcome to the Sports Moment, your ticket to the Summer Olympics. It is Friday, July 26th, and today is the opening ceremonies. I'm Ava Wallace. I'm a sports reporter at The Washington Post here in Paris covering the Summer Games, and I am joined by two of our international reporters for the Post. Rick Noack is our bureau chief covering Afghanistan and Pakistan. Hi, Rick.
Hi.
And Claire Parker is our Cairo bureau chief. Hi, Claire.
Hello.
So, Rick and Claire, something people might not understand is when we cover an Olympics, it's not just sports reporters who are here. We always have foreign correspondents on the ground with us wherever the games are taking place because, of course, the Olympics are not just about sports. So I want to know, why are you here in Paris? Why did you feel like it's important to be here? What are you looking forward to kind of covering? How have you been spending your days? That was 9 questions in a row. Good luck.
Well, I used to be the Paris correspondent until last year, so I've been covering really the preparations for these games.
And how long have you been in Paris?
I've been here for 3.5 years.
Okay.
So it's really interesting for me to see how this is all coming together.
And I'm normally based in the Middle East, but I'm here to cover some of the social and political issues surrounding the games, some of which intersect with my actual beat, which has been covering the war in Gaza and tensions in the Middle East. And some of those are apparent here as well, the games.
And it helps that you guys both speak French, which is
yeah.
very important when you're covering Paris and trying to speak to non-athlete people who are doing things for the games. Today, I want to talk about what these Olympics mean to Paris as a city and the people that live here. I know, Claire, that you were out at a demonstration this morning, kind of a pop-up camp of refugees and migrant families who haven't been able to find places to sleep and stay during the Olympics. And can you describe the scene that you walked in on this morning?
We were in the 18th arrondissement, which is a neighborhood in Paris. I'm standing in front of the mairie of the 18th arrondissement, so the sort of city hall, and there are big French flags and a big poster in front celebrating the Olympic Games. But then camped out in front of the city hall are a crowd of maybe up to 100 people who don't have homes, who are here with their children, with baby carriages, with blankets, with mats. They gathered there to protest the fact that they've been basically sleeping on the streets, and they say that the way that this relates to the Olympics is that French authorities have been kind of embarking on this campaign in recent months to clear out tent encampments, to clear out temporary camps and shelters that unhoused people had set up in order to show Paris as a kind of glossy version of Paris to the people coming to visit for the games. And so the shelters, the actual shelters, are now over full, and a lot of people have been sleeping on the streets as a result, and many of them have small children. Quel est votre nom?
Natasha. Louise.
Okay, so this is Natasha Louise. She is 36, and she's the mother to Richard Manuel, a very cute 1-year-old on her back. Et vous venez d'où?
De Burkina Faso.
Burkina Faso, okay. They're from Burkina Faso. So vous dormez ici ou...
La nuit comme ça, il y a les bus de nuit.
Okay.
C'est les bus de nuit que je prends jusqu'au matin.
Okay, so she says that some nights she has been taking the night bus, which goes around Paris. So she'll board the night bus in the beginning of the night and ride it all night and then get off in the morning with her baby.
For migrants and refugees, I know we've done reporting on a program in France where they're relocating people supposedly to newly constructed facilities that were made for the games. It's billed as an effort to ease Paris's housing crisis, but, you know, refugee advocates, sounds like some of the people you talk to claim it was just the government trying to clear Paris of tent villages and encampments. What's the normal experience, I guess, in Paris, quote unquote, during a non-Olympics time?
I mean, some of the people that we talked to said they'd been sleeping on the streets for years. Others had said that they had had some sort of temporary housing before, but then that disappeared. We also heard from some women who have been priced out of their apartments because landlords had raised the rents to try to profit off of the Olympics. And
so they're renting out apartments to tourists coming in and watching the games. Wow.
We did hear after the protests that we went to that some buses had been sent by the prefect, who's sort of the local police authority, to bring people to some sort of shelter. So I'm still waiting to sort of hear where people will end up going, but it does seem like there's been a bit of movement on that.
So I think the story of a city trying to clean up its streets in advance of any big sporting event, really, but certainly the Olympics is nothing new. We read a lot about it when the Rio Games were there in 2016 in Rio de Janeiro. But Rick, was there a sense that Paris was trying to do things differently this time around?
Well, I think there's a strong contrast between how officials have tried to portray the Olympics here as sort of beneficial for disadvantaged communities, providing work and actually more housing in places like Saint-Denis in the northern suburbs of the city, and this concerted effort to push people out of the city center who live on the streets.
What promises did Paris make in their Olympic bid? I know one of the big things they promised was, of course, to clean up the Seine. Can you tell me a little bit about the things that they said they would do? Just tick off the list.
Well, the Seine, I think, was their big one
yeah.
because they did invest $1.5 billion into that project. So probably
1.5 is a lot. I thought they were trying to make these games cheaper. Also, they're not kind of building so many venues as they are turning current landmarks and current big things into usable things for swimming and for beach volleyball, and we've all heard about those, right?
That is true. They're trying to reuse a lot of stadiums, a lot of infrastructure that exists, and that's what you see in the city center, right? You see all these temporary stadiums that have been built in the Invalides next to the Eiffel Tower. I mean, it looks stunning, but these are all temporary structures and obviously much cheaper to set up than to build a new stadium somewhere. So that's one way they've been able to keep costs down. And the areas where they have invested money in, like the Seine, for example, they want to open it up for the public after the Olympics. So something that would benefit residents, especially also residents living in the poorer areas all along the Seine, where there is an acute lack of public swimming pools.
I should say just really quickly, the reason they wanted to clean up the Seine was because there will be swimming events held there. There will be distance swimming events, and so they needed to clean up the historically disgusting river so that people wouldn't get sick after swimming and debacterialize that.
And a river that was declared biologically dead in the 1960s. So.
Biologically dead? Oh my goodness.
They said that only 3 fish species were still alive in the center of the city at that point, or something like that.
Nothing grows here.
But they have done a pretty good job when it comes to cleaning up the river. Obviously, there's been a lot of controversy around whether it'll be ready, and if it rains, it could still disrupt these competitions. So they're taking quite a big gamble in that sense. But if it does work, it would change life for Parisians quite significantly to be able to swim in the Seine, if you're brave enough, right? If it's safe. And you can already see that in the north of Paris, there's this canal that they've cleaned up and where people swim in the summer. And it's actually quite nice. So there's a little beach and people enjoying the canal water.
One very actually measurable initiative that you can kind of see the difference in. Interesting. After the break, we're going to come back and talk more about the political backdrop of these games. So I want to talk more about the political context of what's going on during the games, because it really has seemed quite magical from the sporting perspective of things. But I was reading your guys' story where you called it, I think, quote unquote, it's going to be an extremely tense Summer Olympics. And then one of our columnists, Candace Buckner, was at a soccer game where the Israeli men's team was playing, and she described kind of the same tension. We've obviously got 2 wars going on, the war in Gaza and the ongoing invasion in Ukraine. The Israeli team is traveling with extra security. Where do you guys maybe expect to see that tension that you were talking about bubbling up? Will people at home be able to see any of that on TV, or are you going to see it if you're in the stands in person? Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think you already saw that. I was also at this Israel-Mali soccer match, and you had people chanting Free Palestine. You had Israeli supporters demanding the release of hostages outside the stadium and chants. So you really did feel tensions, and I think that's not going anywhere. These debates, these confrontations still continue throughout these games, and the Israeli delegation is quite sizable here at the Olympics.
Yeah, they have 88 athletes here, and they're under extra security protection. Some of them have apparently received threats, and so, that's added to the kind of environment of tension around the Israeli delegation. But I think for the Israelis, the example of 1972 in Munich games when 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were killed by Palestinian militants has loomed large ever since, and especially at this moment when there's a lot of opposition globally to Israel's war in Gaza, and including at the Olympics and around the Olympics. We've seen French lawmakers and then protesters in France for months calling for a boycott of Israel at the Olympics and calling on the IOC not to allow Israel to participate in the Olympics. And I think there have been a lot of people who've sort of drawn comparisons between how Israel has been treated and Russia. So Russia has been banned from competing under its, National Olympic Committee and its flag. There are some Russian athletes competing as neutrals. And part of the justification for that was Russia's breach of the Olympic truce, which is this idea that for a week before the Games and until a week after the Paralympic Games, participants in the Games are supposed to refrain from conflict, from waging war on other countries.
It's interesting also that we're going to be feeling all of this kind of tension and consequences of this conflict all around the Games. It seems like everywhere except the athletes, because athletes, something that I always forget until I get on site in an Olympics, that athletes are banned from expressing political views during competition. Like whenever you think of Olympic athletes who've made protests during the Games, that's why it's such a huge deal, because you're supposed to be apolitical when you're competing at the Olympics. So it's just going to be kind of all along the fringes.
Yeah, there are very specific rules, but there is some space for athletes to make political comments outside of the venues, for example. So I think we will see, people posting on social media and making political demands. And we will probably also see political expressions during the competitions themselves, for example, people refusing handshakes and so on. And that will force the IOC to make some uncomfortable decisions and figure out on a case-by-case basis how to deal with these expressions.
Interesting. The way Paris has been dealing with this kind of tension seems to be with a ton of police presence. Like, it's been really intense. When I walked to the Olympic Village earlier this week, I saw waves of, I counted 13 police officers before I saw a single athlete. You see them everywhere here. How concerned are French authorities about kind of the security situation? What do you guys know about that?
I think it's quite clear they're extremely concerned. There are tens of thousands of police officers in the city right now. It's impossible for most people, it's impossible to really cross the river easily.
Tell me more about what access has been restricted in the city center and where people can and can't go. That's all for security reasons, correct?
That's for security reasons. And they're really they're primarily concerned about the opening ceremonies because they're supposedly watched by over 1 billion people.
And they're
around
open
the world.
air. It's not like it's in a stadium where you're scanning people's bags. Like they're just on the river. For
the first time outside a stadium, with all the risks this poses. And the opening ceremonies, I think, were conceived at a time when wasn't clear how geopolitically tense this moment would be. And so as a result of all of this, they've had to reduce the number of spectators quite significantly over the past few months to assure safety. But at the same time, I think there's still going to be over 300,000 people watching from the river. So it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. Even though you guys have been spending most of your time covering kind of the non-sports side of the Games, I'm just wondering, what are you looking forward to seeing during these Olympics when you're not having to cover kind of protests and wade into things that certainly weigh on all of our minds? Are you looking forward to getting away from it all, or are you more like, no, we should be talking about this stuff more?
I'd like to go to Tahiti and watch the surfing competitions.
Rick, we'd all like to go to Tahiti. But you're the second Rick on this podcast, in fact, who wants to go to Tahiti.
But my second option would be, so I live near the Eiffel Tower, thankfully. And, I'm really just excited to see the stadium there. It must be such a stunning view and atmosphere. So I really look forward to seeing that.
Anything you're looking forward to seeing, Claire?
Just going to some sports events. Which is so different than what I normally cover. And this is the first time I'm covering the Olympics. So it is exciting to be here, and good French food.
So I've been asking kind of all my colleagues this question at the end of episodes, but what's one thing that won't necessarily make it into your reporting every day that you might not include in a story, Rick?
Wow. I've never seen Paris so empty
as weird,
I have
right?
of walking through this counterterrorism gray zone.
Yeah.
It's like out of a movie. I'm not sure
You're not sure what kind of movie it is? Yeah.
Unclear what kind of movie it is, but it's really stunning. And I don't think we'll ever see Paris like that again, or at least not for a long time.
Claire, what about you?
I think it's been funny to hear about. I mean, you hear a lot of like French people and definitely officials giving a very rosy view of the Olympics.
They've all been nice to me.
Yeah. I've had some funny encounters with some Parisians who are characteristically grumpy and mad about the games happening in their city and various inconveniences. One man told me that it's the first time he's detested the Olympics.
Wow.
So that was a strong sentiment.
I bet that sounds so much more threatening in French, too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that seems like a good place to leave today's episode. Thank you so much, Claire and Rick.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Rick Noack is our bureau chief covering Afghanistan and Pakistan, and Claire Parker is our Cairo bureau chief for The Post. Before we go, there's not much on the schedule today, but the opening ceremonies start at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, which is the live broadcast, and NBC will air a rebroadcast at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. That's it for today on The Sports Moment. If you want more up-to-date information about the latest news from Paris, you should also subscribe to my newsletter, which is also called The Sports Moment. You can find a link to the Sports Moment newsletter in our show notes. Today's episode was produced and mixed by Ted Muldoon. It was edited by Matt Rennie, Joe Tone, and Allison Michaels. I'm Ava Wallace. Until next time from Paris.